The lunch crowd buzzed through the small-town diner where everyone knew each other's business. In a quiet corner, an elderly man wearing a veteran's cap ate alone. 3 teenagers approached, smirking. One snatched his drink. Emily, watching from across the room, clenched her fists. She'd seen enough. Emily had worked at Hometown Diner for just over a year now. At 25, she knew every regular customer, their orders, and most of their stories. Frank Thompson, the 75-year-old retired Marine, was one of her favorites. Every Tuesday, he'd come in wearing his Korean War veteran cap, order the same meal, turkey club with extra pickles, and leave a generous tip despite his modest appearance. Today, Frank sat quietly in his usual corner booth, his weathered hands slightly trembling as he carefully cut his sandwich. His posture remained Marine straight, despite his age, shoulders square even when seated. A small purple heart pin adorned his faded jacket pocket. The teenagers had been eyeing him for several minutes. The tallest one, with a backwards baseball cap and an oversized hoodie, nudged his friends and whispered something that made them snicker. The girl with bright pink streaks in her blonde hair pulled out her phone, while the third teen, heavy-set with an expensive gaming shirt, shifted impatiently. Other customers noticed the brewing situation. An elderly couple exchanged concerned glances. A businessman lowered his newspaper slightly, but no one moved to intervene. Frank kept his eyes down, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He'd likely face worse in 2 wars. When the tall teen snatched Frank's glass of water and took a swig, Emily had enough. She set down her serving tray and marched directly to their table. "Hey!" Her voice cut through the diner's ambient noise. "Leave him alone. Now." The teens froze momentarily before the tall one recovered with a smirk. "Chill out, lady. We're just having some fun with Grandpa War stories here." Emily planted herself firmly between them and Frank's table. "This isn't fun. You're harassing a customer, and if you don't leave right now, I'll make sure you regret it." The girl lowered her phone slightly, but kept recording. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops?" she mocked, voice dripping with sarcasm. Emily leaned in slightly, speaking with calm authority. "I could call your parents. I'm sure they'd love to see this video you're filming. Or I could have the manager ban you permanently. Your choice." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the girl's face. She lowered her phone completely. The tall teen rolled his eyes dramatically. "Whatever. This place sucks anyway." As they turned to leave, the heavy-set boy reached over and deliberately knocked Frank's fresh coffee across his lap. The hot liquid soaked through his pants, but Frank barely flinched. The teens laughed as they headed for the door. Frank quietly reached for napkins, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. Emily grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, handing it to him. Frank looked up with tired eyes that had seen battlefields. "Not your fault, young lady. Some people just weren't taught respect." "Emily, my office. Now." Mr. Reynolds, the manager, stood at the kitchen doorway, his face flushed red. Emily's stomach dropped as she gave Frank an apologetic look before following Reynolds. The office door had barely closed when Reynolds turned on her. "What were you thinking, talking to customers that way?" Emily stood her ground. "Those weren't customers. They were bullies. I was protecting Frank." Reynolds shook his head, exasperated. "Those bullies have parents who spend hundreds here every month. We can't afford to lose regular customers over some old veteran." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. "So, you'd rather let them humiliate a man who served our country?" "I'd rather you had come to me instead of handling it yourself," Reynolds countered, though he'd clearly been watching without intervening. "That's what management is for." "You were right there and did nothing," Emily said, anger rising in her voice. Reynolds' face hardened. "That's enough. Hand over your apron. You're done here." The words hit like a physical blow. "You're firing me? For standing up for someone. I'm firing you for confronting paying customers without authorization." Reynolds held out his hand expectantly. Emily's hands trembled as she untied her apron. She depended on this job for rent, for groceries, for everything. But she refused to let Reynolds see her cry as she placed the apron on his desk and walked out, head held high despite the uncertainty crushing down on her future. Emily sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Fired, just like that, for doing the right thing. The unfairness burned in her chest as she fought back tears. Rent was due next week. Her refrigerator was nearly empty. How would she explain this to her mother? Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate Lisa. "Want to grab dinner tonight?" Emily typed back, "Can't. Just got fired. Not in the mood." Lisa's response was immediate. "What?" "I'm coming over as soon as I get off work." A gentle knock on her window made Emily jump. Frank stood there, his pants still damp from the coffee, concern etched on his weathered face. She rolled down the window. "You all right, young lady?" His voice carried the steady calm of someone who'd weathered far worse storms. Emily forced a smile. "I'll be fine." Frank nodded, studying her with eyes that had seen combat across 2 continents. "What you did in there? Standing up for me. Most people wouldn't have bothered." Emily shrugged. It was the right thing to do. Without another word, Frank reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. It contained only a phone number, printed in bold black letters. "What's this?" Emily asked, confused. "Call that number if you need anything," Frank said simply. "And I mean anything." Before she could ask more questions, he patted the car door twice and walked away, his military posture never faltering despite his age. Emily glanced at the card again before tossing it onto the passenger seat. Right now, she needed to focus on finding another job before her savings evaporated. As she drove home, her phone buzzed repeatedly with social media notifications. The video was spreading, the one the pink-haired teen had been recording. It showed everything. Frank sitting quietly, the teens harassing him, Emily stepping in, and later, Reynolds firing her. The post was going viral. Waitress defends veteran, gets fired for it. Comments flooded in, many expressing outrage at the diner's management. Emily was still processing this development when she noticed something unusual through her apartment window, a long procession of vehicles heading toward downtown. Many were SUVs and trucks, but there were also dozens of motorcycles, all moving with purpose. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello, is this Emily Chambers?" A deep, authoritative voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Major James Wilson. I serve with Frank Thompson in the Corps. We saw what happened today." Emily's pulse quickened. "The video?" "Yes, ma'am. Frank called me personally. I want you to know we have your back." Before she could respond, he continued, "Turn on your local Facebook community page. Now." Emily quickly opened the app to find a live stream. Someone was broadcasting from outside the diner. The camera panned to show the parking lot filling with men and women, many in their 60s and 70s, others younger, all standing tall with military bearing. Some wore Marine Corps hats or jackets. There must have been hundreds. The caption read, "Marines showing up for one of their own, and the waitress who defended him. Over 500 expected." Another message came through, "We're at the diner. Come if you can." Emily grabbed her keys, heart racing. As she drove toward downtown, she couldn't believe what was happening. The streets around the diner were packed with vehicles bearing Marine Corps bumper stickers and license plate frames. When she finally parked a block away, she could hear it. Not the roar of motorcycles from the original story, but something equally powerful. Hundreds of voices, the disciplined murmur of men and women who'd once sworn the same oath. Emily approached the crowd nervously. These weren't rowdy bikers, but retired and active Marines standing in near formation, their discipline evident even in civilian clothes. Many wore caps or jackets identifying their units or conflicts: Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan, a living timeline of American military history. When people recognized her from the video, a ripple moved through the crowd. Someone began to clap, then another, and suddenly hundreds of Marines were applauding her. Emily's face flushed with embarrassment and pride. Frank appeared beside her, standing straighter than she'd ever seen him, as if the presence of his fellow Marines had erased decades from his posture. "Didn't expect this, did you?" he asked with a slight smile. Before she could answer, a tall man with silver hair cut high and tight approached. Despite being in his 60s, he carried himself with unmistakable authority. Major Wilson, Frank said by way of introduction, offering a respectful nod. Major Wilson extended his hand to Emily. "Thank you for defending one of ours when we couldn't be there." Emily shook his hand, overwhelmed. "I just did what anyone should have done." "But they didn't," Wilson replied. "You did." The diner's door swung open, and Mr. Reynolds emerged, his face pale as he surveyed the sea of Marines. His eyes found Emily, then darted to the local news van that had just pulled up. Wilson stepped forward. "Are you the manager who fired this young woman?" Reynolds swallowed visibly. "There's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." Wilson cut him off. "We saw the video. You allowed 3 teenagers to harass a decorated Korean and Vietnam War veteran. Then you fired the only person with enough courage to intervene." Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. "Marines take care of their own," Wilson continued, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Frank Thompson served this country honorably through 2 wars. He earned a Purple Heart defending the freedoms that allow you to run this business." Reynolds' voice shook. "I can fix this. Emily, you can have your job back. With a raise." Emily glanced at Frank, whose eyes reflected both pride and a question. What did she want to do? She turned back to Reynolds. "I don't want my job back, but I do want you to apologize to Frank, publicly, and I want your promise that those teens won't be welcome here again." Reynolds nodded quickly. "Of course. Absolutely." He turned to Frank. "Sir, I deeply apologize for what happened today. It was inexcusable." Frank acknowledged the apology with a curt nod, but said nothing. Major Wilson smiled slightly. "Good choice." The Marines dispersed after making their point, but not before many of them gave Emily their business cards. By evening, her phone wouldn't stop ringing with job offers. Everything from administrative positions at veteran organizations to security firms interested in her courage under pressure. Lisa scrolled through Emily's notifications in amazement. "You've gone viral for all the right reasons. Look at these offers." Emily was still processing everything when a text came through from Major Wilson. "A friend of mine runs Dakota Security. They protect high-profile clients. They're looking for someone with your integrity. Interested?" "This is insane," Emily murmured. 24 hours ago, I was worried about making rent." Frank sat across from them in Lisa's living room, looking more relaxed than Emily had ever seen him at the diner. "Sometimes standing up for what's right comes with a cost," he said. "But sometimes it comes with rewards too." A week later, Emily started her training at Dakota Security. The pay was twice what she'd made at the diner, with benefits she'd never imagined possible with her community college education. The incident had other ripple effects. The local paper ran a feature on Frank, detailing his service in Korea and Vietnam. Veterans began frequenting the diner, not Reynolds' diner, which had lost significant business, but a competing establishment where Frank now ate his Tuesday lunches. Emily still joined him sometimes, listening to stories he'd never shared before. She'd learned that courage wasn't always about dramatic acts of heroism. Sometimes it was simply standing up when everyone else remained seated. "You know what impressed me most?" Frank told her one day. "Not that you stood up to those kids, but that you did it knowing you might lose your job." Emily smiled. "I never expected all this to happen." "That's how life works," Frank replied. "You do the right thing, not knowing where it leads, but it always leads somewhere." Emily's story spread far beyond their small town, inspiring others to stand up for veterans and vulnerable people in their communities. What began as a simple act of decency had sparked a movement of respect. As she settled into her new career, Emily often thought about that moment of decision in the diner. One choice had changed everything. Not just for her, but for Frank and countless others who've been reminded that courage still mattered. If you've ever stood up for someone when it wasn't easy, share your story in the comments. Respect isn't just given. Sometimes it must be defended. What would you have done in Emily's position?